Welcome to Bible for Overcomers. So just a quick topic right now, and that is usury, interest charged for loans. We could also say interest that you get for an account that you put with an institution. I have some people that will put comments raging about, or not raging, but always talking about usury. Well, usury was condemned under the Mosaic law, but in the New Testament there's precious little written about usury. And I never really addressed that subject until this moment, because I have learned some things about this topic, and I want to pass that on to you real quick. So usury being seen as unjust, taking advantage of people, was absolutely proscribed under Moses' law. However, we must remember that at that time they lived with varying degrees in what we would call a sound money system, and that there was coinage, copper, silver, gold, that was used. Now I know Roman emperors started to mix other base metals into that, but if you go back throughout the ancient world, usually the money that you had was, they weren't like mining more of it all the time. That mining technology was pretty much stagnant. So they had units of money that actually would appreciate over time, and if you would demand interest on a loan when that money is already going up, that was seen as unjust. So do you know that in the United States and throughout much of the Western world in the 1800s, most of that century, most of it was a period of deflationary times, which is the opposite of inflation, which means that your money is actually able to buy more. Now, in the New Testament, there is nothing against usury. However, common sense would tell you as a Christian, if you are engaged in the financial industry, anything that would be above and beyond what a normal company or person would rate based on that company or that individual's credit record would seem to be excessive, and we would call it usury or unjust interest. And so you would have to let your conscience be guide on that. But in general, the reason now why, with the central banks that most countries are living under, not with, but under, our money is constantly inflating, which means that it's buying less. So of course, an institution or a lender is going to want to get interest above and beyond that inflation rate. So that is the reason. Now, let me just give you a Bible verse. So in the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, Jesus actually expected in this example usury or interest. Now, granted, it's based on somebody's works, it's not a money thing, but it is interesting that terminology is used. So just read that one verse, Matthew 25:27. I won't make a big deal about it, but Jesus, in judging those that had received the 1 talent, then he which had received the 1 talent, verse 24, came and said, Lord, I knew that you are a hard man. Okay, let me just get down to verse 27. Jesus told him, thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. It actually says that here in the King James. So it's important to keep that in mind. We're in the New Testament, and also the times that we live in are central bank times. Now I understand that there wasn't central banks from the first century forward, but we do live under that now. Our money is not sound, it is not deflationary, it is not buying more than it used to buy. So therefore, lenders are going to have a rate of interest much greater than the inflation rate so that they can conduct their business. Again, anything well over and above what a person or a company is rated on their credit profile, that would seem to be unjust and taking advantage of people. But pure interest is not when you are living without sound money. And by the way, did you know that, at least in the United States, Andrew Jackson had defeated the idea of a central bank. Others, notable people, were against the idea of the central bank, and the central bank was pushed back a couple times, if not 3 times, in the 1800s. But in 1913, that's when that central bank got set up, and of course it was sold to the public. That it was going to take care of the boom and bust cycle, because they had gone through a period in 1907 and some periods in the 1890s. It was supposed to even that out. Of course, it's done anything but that, because it was just another 25 years later, when actually, no, it was about 14, 15 years later, and had the Great Depression. There was another crash in 1921. And of course, how many times the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, 2007 and 8. There's been many periods where we've had this. So the central bank did not take care of that. But that's it for my rant. But we've lost 97% of our purchasing power on the dollar since 1913, when the central bank was enacted, with an average over the years of 3.16 inflation. Now, anybody that goes out and buys food knows that the figures you're being told for inflation right now is not accurate. And that's putting it very nicely. Okay? You have to understand, there's a lot of propaganda going on. You know that you're paying a lot more than like 3.5% interest. It's probably double digits, really, but that's just me speaking, and this is not a financial channel, nor do I give financial advice. You have to do these disclaimers all the time. I'm married, but I'm pretty sure my wife is a female, although I'm not a trained biologist, right? It looks like it's probably going to rain, but then again, I'm not a trained meteorologist. That's how silly this society has gotten. But regardless of all that, 97% has been lost since 1913. And it picked up again in 1971 when President Nixon took us off the gold standard. So what does this all have to do with a Christian channel, with try to be, stay in the Bible? Well, it's because there are a lot of Christians here in now, New Testament, right, that keep talking about usury. And that is my take on it. And maybe there's things that I'm not seeing. But you can't compare a sound money period, again with different issues, but basically a sound money period when Moses' law was written, and compare it to now when we're all losing to inflation. And again, there's that verse in Matthew 25 that we just read, and the parable of the talents. Also Luke 19, the parable of the 10 pounds. There's similar verbiage, I believe, but regardless, there is no proscription or verse that just clear-cut says that interest is an evil thing. Now, of course, when it is at an extraordinary amount, which would be defined as above and beyond what most institutions, if you even them out, would charge an individual or a company based on their credit profile, then that would be, unjust. I don't know that I'd call it usury, though, because I think that would confuse the issue. But we would all have to just be guided by our conscience about working in an institution that actually charged exorbitant interest. Kind of like, charging $10 for a little bottled water in a hurricane zone, or, in some zone where they just had a big wildfire and people can't get supplies. That's obviously what I'm talking about. That would be excessive. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. I know that the poet Ezra Pound wrote about usury in the early 1900s, and did some extraordinary poems on that. And of course, I know he was keying on, well, we won't go on and go there. But anyway, you can look up that for yourself. There's many things here that we cannot necessarily talk about and define, and you have to be quick enough to sort of read between the lines on some of it. It's pretty obvious. But anyway, so that's what the Bible has to say, and what I, in my opinion, has to say, and looking at some history about this subject of interest, of usury, and how it's probably about the last thing that a New Testament Christian should be worried about, because it's not proscribed. Let me just say this too about inflation. Do you understand that it is a stealth tax, that the government is absolutely lifting money out of your back pocket every year, and like I say, to an average of 3.16% over time since every year since 1913. Your wages more than likely don't go up by an average of 3.16 every year, decade over decade. So it is a stealth steal, a stealth tax. That's why many of us are not fans of this central banking system, because it was sold on the premise that it was going to even out, the busts in the economy, and it has done anything but that. It also enables governments, by the way, to fight endless wars, because they can just print. Whereas if you look back in history, something like the 100 Years' War, back in the 1400s or so, 1400s in Europe. I mean, the 100 Years' War constantly had pauses because the kings had to go back, England and France and the rest of them had to go back and beg their barons and steal from their people to raise more gold, to raise more armies. They couldn't do unlimited warfare. But with central banks, you can do unlimited warfare, because you just print the money, and your populace will suffer, not just from the blood and propaganda of the wars, but also because you will lose more money due to all that inflation. Anyway, God bless you, and I hope you found that interesting. Thank you.